We are very excited to be with you here today to have this really important topic. But I wanted to thank everybody for who participated in the poll. It's a pretty great response rate. So I think we can share the results if you can, Gabrielle. I really always love to see what kind of folks are in our events. Another question we sometimes ask is, have you been to one of our events before or heard of the network before? And sometimes it's no. And so we're always excited to see new friends and recurring friends and to see all the different types of places you work and the kinds of things you do. So fantastic. All right, so we'll move on from there. Going to just get myself situated here. So we're here to talk about equity in action. And my name is Christina Clayton, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. I'll explain more what that is in a moment. We're very happy to have Dr. Stewart here from C4 Innovations. So I want to start also with our land acknowledgement. And even though we are in a virtual space, we at the University of Washington acknowledge all the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land that touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We do this slide, even though we're virtual, to just really, truly honor the spirit and heritage and work for justice in these communities. And if you want to learn more about the stewards of your land, we'll put a link in the chat about native land. A couple things you may have noticed on the lobby side, we'll review in just a moment some logistics, but we're very excited to be with you today. So the Mental Health Technology Transfer Network is a nationwide network sponsored by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, and it includes 10 regional centers, a national American Indian Alaska Native Center, a national Hispanic and Latino center, and a network coordinating office. And there are similar networks for the addiction and prevention fields as well. So we support resource development, dissemination, training, and technical assistance, and workforce development for the mental health field and beyond. And so we are in Region 10. And so we get the pleasure working with Alaska, Oregon, Idaho, and Washington, but also everywhere because it's virtual. Our specific center in the Northwest is based at the University of Washington in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. And so the goals of our network are the same for our center, is accelerate the adoption and implementation of evidence-based practices and other practices, heighten awareness, knowledge, and skills of the workforce, fostering alliances with communities, and ensure the availability and delivery of free, publicly available training like today. So our area of focus for the network is evidence-based practices for serious mental health issues such as psychosis specifically, but we train in a lot of other topics, as you can see today. So, and we do this through webinars, online trainings. You can do self-paced learning communities, newsletters, resource libraries, announcements, and that sort of thing. So we have a lot of content on our website. We'll share that soon. And, if you want to sign up and get our announcements, please do. A little bit about language. We agreed as our network to share these slides when we have events because we want to use affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in the work we're involved in. And so we want to remain mindful that everyone has different perspectives that may come up in these events, but we kindly ask everyone to just use respectful, non-judgmental, inclusive, and accepting language around all things when we're here today. And some housekeeping things. Pretty used to Zoom, I imagine by now. You're muted, you're not on video, it's a webinar. We have a big group today. It will be recorded. You will get access to the recording as well as the slides. There is closed captioning. If you don't want that, you can close that out. If you don't know how to get to it and you need it, please chat into the chat and we'll help you. And there is a certificate of attendance that you can get later, and we'll email you about that. It's not formal CEs, but you might be able to use it towards that. for today, when we talked with Dr. Stewart, she said that she'll be keeping an eye on the chat to the best of her abilities, as well as the Q&A. So we would ask just to kind of keep it separate and be able to separate those things. Chat, please share whatever you'd like in the chat, just a comment or hi or something. But if you have a question for Dr. Stewart, if you could put it in the Q&A, that would help us know that there are questions waiting for her. Okay. Evaluation. So just want to share, SAMHSA does fund our center. They obviously do not know the details of every event that we put on, so there's a disclosure there. They did recently change their survey. So we have a short survey that we ask that you complete. But if you've taken one of these surveys before, you will notice that it looks different. And they used to ask for a 4-digit personal code. Now it's 12. And you know what? It's a webinar, so you can put whatever letters and numbers you feel comfortable with. It doesn't trace back to you. We don't get that information from you. We just get your data about how you like the event or what you'd suggest differently. And we really appreciate that. There is some qualitative questions now as well, but it should take you no more than 2 minutes. And we appreciate your feedback. We look at it every time and we share the aggregated results with our presenters. Now to the good stuff. Dr. Stewart. So happy to have you. Do you want to say a quick hi before we get into the...
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here. I'm pumped up. There are 117 people here, which means I expect the chat to be engaged and conversations to be going off. So I'm really excited.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I am so pleased because I missed the other event you did with us. So Ashley Stewart, PhD, MSW, LSW, received her PhD from the Ohio State University College of Social Work and her master's at Columbia University. Dr. Stewart is a race equity subject matter expert, trainer, and curriculum developer specialist at C4 Innovations. In this role, she has provided technical assistance, training, and organizational support to national organizations, boards of directors, and behavioral health organizations on implementing anti-racist practices. She uses an equity-centered approach to ensure that diversity and inclusion efforts move forward and reduce harm to people marginalized by systems. Her work includes assessing the intersections of identity, structural oppression, wellness, and policy, in addition to the advanced study of consequences and causes of identity-based oppression. Dr. Stewart supports implementing anti-oppressive practices in organizational, structural, programmatic, and interpersonal interventions. I am very glad to be here with you today because this is just fantastic. So to start off, we're going to have a conversation, Dr. Stewart, and I'm so happy to be with you today. We are talking about equity in action, and I'm so grateful for that phrasing. And it's so crucial that we talk about this, not just interpersonally, but what does that look like in a bigger way? So when you think about this topic, just so we can all be more visible, why did you choose that phrase for describing this topic?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, I'm sure that many of us have had lots of conversations about equity, diversity, inclusion, we've been talking about it. And I really feel like people are in a space where they want to know what they can do. And action happens in a lot of ways. A lot of times equity is seen as like something specific, but it's really about a sincere culture change. And so we want to talk about what does it look like? What does the sustainability look like? How do we move change forward? And what are the next steps for people who are really meaningfully invested in change work? So providing a little bit of support in that action space for folk.
No, that's great because I think it is, it's always a challenge to, I think for me anyway, and other folks I've spoken with, you want to work on yourself, you want to work on your immediate community and also see that something is happening. And so I really love that you're talking at so many levels on how we can make change. we have heard all the different things that you are fantastic doing out in this world. How did you get to this position? How did you, what path or journey or key moment kind of led you to doing this equity work on so many levels with so many people in such a broad and meaningful way?
Yeah. I've always, even in my original research and scholarship, I was so interested and intrigued by what role the environment played. I'm a mental health provider, and when working with folks, there was so much of the trauma, there was so much of the experiences that people were having that was connected to systemic, structural, societal issues. It was connected to the institutions they were working for. It was connected to the places and spaces that they were occupying and the way they were interacting with other people. And so, in supporting individuals who were coping with and processing this information, I also wanted to be able to do something to change the institutions and change the organizations to stop perpetuating that harm onto people. And that's really how I got into this work. This is, what pushes me, what I'm passionate about, what I've been studying and my research for many, many years. And it all comes around to the baseline of wellness, of helping people not have to continuously cope with injustices, but starting to address the injustices so that they can stop.
Mm. Yeah, that's really powerful, and so grateful that you're here again today. What would you say, because you've done this work for a long time, you've been moved by what you've seen in the field and want to do more? This may be an impossible question, but what would you say is the most common challenge or couple of challenges that people face in trying to do this very thing that you're saying, putting equity into action?
I think equity tends to be treated as an additive. It's treated as something we can do in a 5-point plan. It's something that this group of individuals can do, and it's not seen as a whole person, whole culture shift, which is really what it comes down to. Equity is about examining the critical gaps. And so some of the common challenges I see are people becoming discouraged, people becoming fatigued with the process, not acknowledging that these issues are not new issues. And so our response to it has to be consistent and as diligent. And also that it's something that's going to evoke a sense of change that's going to make us uncomfortable, because it's not like a two-step process or a one-year plan. It is about really shifting the dynamic. And most people are apprehensive to that type of change.
And I think that's true. And I think that when so many of us, post the beginning of the pandemic, George Floyd's murder, everyone, I think, took an even harder look. I think many people anyway, and many organizations thought about, we need to do something more. And yet I know probably another challenge is, as you were mentioning, not to have it be just a committee that you have and it doesn't really infuse everything about what you're trying to do, or we as people also having to grow and change, which is painful at times, right? So I think I'm just so inspired when I hear people that are so passionate about this work. It keeps me going. So I really appreciate it. And then I will end with, what inspires you, and in thinking about other folks that we've had as guests, what is giving you hope right now? What inspires you to keep going, given that it's not ending and it hasn't ended? And I don't know when all this stuff will really, really change, but what inspires you at this point?
Yeah. I'm inspired by I think when we talk about inspiration, sometimes it's like depicted as something that I see that's like some glimmer in the far distance. But what inspires me is the reality of the urgency of it. I'm inspired by the fact that it has to happen, that it's not optional, that people are being harmed. And I feel that urgency in my body each and every day, and that inspires me, that motivates me to do the work. I also stay inspired because through the work that I have the opportunity to do, through the students who I'm able to encourage to think about their work differently, through the professionals who I'm able to support in developing the skills to be able to address this, I am seeing, opportunities among like my colleagues who are doing similar work, change happening in different ways. And a lot of times folks will ask, do I think equity is achievable? And I think that equity is something we will continue to strive to. I think that we are seeing achievements in small ways continuously. I'm pushing for urgent, more drastic change around equity. And I think that the idea that equity is like an ending spot is something that we really want to push forward in and seeing as continuously growing, because as our society changes, as the needs of people change, and as we continue to uncover the ways that we've been inequitable, we will continue to want to strive towards being even more equitable each and every day. So yes, I think it's achievable, but I also don't see it as like an end goal. And I'm inspired by that, the opportunity to continue to heal and address and confront and create more equitable opportunities for people. So that really inspires me, the work of it.
Well, thank you so much. This is it's been great to talk with you. I think thinking about how we can put together an approach as you described, living up to the words and actually doing the action as you described to really necessarily strive for equity. So I appreciate the time and appreciate your conversation. All right, so Dr. Stewart, I will be handing it off to you for your presentation. Get ready, folks. I imagine this is going to be a wild, exciting ride to hear what you have to say today. So thank you so much. I'm very much looking forward to your content.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm really excited to be here. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful for the invite. I'm grateful for everyone who coordinated. And most importantly, I'm grateful for the 140 people in the room. How are y'all feeling today? Y'all ready? Now the chat should be flooding with folks telling me they're ready because it's time. Good. Renetta, I'm happy to see that. Ready? Yes. I love it. Excited. Let's do this. All right. Well, we have like an hour. So we're going to just like get started on some stuff. There's going to be some conversations we'll need to continue to have, and that's okay. But I welcome you all to write in the chat. Like I kind of see it as almost like a superpower. I can kind of keep up what's going in the chat. So feel welcome to pose questions. And if you have a question that you want to put into the room, but you're not necessarily sure that you want all 140 people in here to see it, if you send it to the panelists or me directly, we'll be able to read that without naming you. So I want to offer that to folks as well. Also, before I get started, I just want to make note that if anybody is utilizing a reader and needs any of the slides in accessible formatting, just let me know so I can make sure we get that to you directly. Yes. Yes. JP, I see your question. I'm definitely going to incorporate that. That's a great question. Yep. So what y'all getting yourself into today? I already been introduced, but something else that I wanted to add is, my work as a mental health provider, it has allowed me to engage in these conversations in a multitude of different ways and to begin to appreciate the physiological impact of having these conversations. So I just want to take a moment to set the stage and honor the folks in this room for whom what we talk about is lived experience, and just acknowledge that and name that and bring honor to that in our space too. Oh, thank you, Christina. You can put anonymous questions too, if you'd like. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what is equity. We're going to define really tangible examples of equity. I know a few folks have already given me feedback that we want to talk about what do we do with limited data, or, what ways do we infuse data into the process of understanding how to be specific in assessing equity. So I'm going to cover that for my folks who want to know that. We're going to talk about assessing our readiness to engage in meaningful conversations around equity. So yes, we're going to go through what is transformation change. We're going to talk about what it looks like in practice. And also as I just alluded to when we began, the real part of that transformation work is doing some critical self-assessment. So we're going to do some critical self-assessment in this space too. And that will be engaging and assessing our readiness to participate in conversations around equity. And then we're going to look at what are common pitfalls when it comes to implementing equitable practices. Where do we see people tend to have the biggest barriers or challenges, and what are some things that we can do to go around those? So this is something that I use in every single space that I occupy. These are what I consider my best practices to engage in these conversations. So what I would like for you to do is, as I read through them, if you particularly like one, I want you to put that in the chat for me. If you have a question about one, I want you to put that in the chat for me too. For this slide, if you have a question about one of them, just put it in the chat so I can see it for you, okay? The first one is to expect a lack of closure. This is a journey. We're talking about equity. We have 45 minutes, right? So this is a journey. And it's not, I don't believe in tying things up with a bow so that we all are like, yeah, we want to continue to wrestle with and think about and process the information. That's part of it. Asking for clarification. You and I and other 144 people in this room, we're coming to this conversation at very different spaces and places. So we want to ask for clarification. Because we might be using terms differently. We want to embrace discomfort. It's a part of the process. This is not the work for us to take and go tell someone else to do. This is the work for us to do. And we want to honor all experiences and expertise equally. A lot of times we consider people who have studied it to be the experts. We are going to honor lived experience in this space today. It is going to be a safe and a brave space, meaning that talking about deconstructing forms of oppression, because some feels pretty safe to me, might be a newer concept to other folks. I want to encourage bravery, and that's the same for things you might be in this space, bring questions to the space. I'm going to exhibit some bravery to engage in those conversations. My absolute favorite is revisiting welcome. It acknowledges and honors that we all process information differently. So if my folks in the room who are looking at these slides, if we're on the last slide and you have a question about something that was on the first slide, I want you to know that I want you to ask it. I support you asking it. And I'm going to address it and bring it back into the space, because a lot of us miss opportunities to engage because we have I wish I would have said, we just process information differently. There's no expectation that everyone's able to fully formulate the thought as soon as it comes up on the screen for 30 seconds. So let's give ourselves a welcoming environment to continue to bring things back in, even if it seems like we've moved on past that topic. That's not going to be a thing in this space. I want to affirm and give credit if somebody says something in the chat and you're like, yeah, that was great, Sandra. I want you to put that in there and acknowledge folks who are sharing. Revoke expert positioning. We did the little the poll in the beginning. Y'all are doing some amazing dynamic work, and in a lot of the spaces you're in, you are expected to be an expert. So we're going to try to revoke that, and just, it feels good to just be like, I'm just here to learn and engage, and I would love for y'all to have that experience. Listen to understand, even if we don't agree. Even if we have questions, put the questions. We can have the conversation, but we want to listen to people, want to give people an opportunity. Be accountable to the impact of our words and actions. I might intend for something to come up and it might come up the other way. And so it beautifully feeds into accountability is kind. I believe in engaging with folks. So I'll use myself as an example. Someone saying, hey, Dr. Stewart, hey, Ashley, I know that you care about this work and you said this, and that might actually be isolating to people. That accountability is kind, because it allows me to continue to show up and reduce harm. And so sometimes we see calling people out or like letting people know when they said something wrong as like something that is harmful or disengaging. But I want to reframe it and say accountability is kind because it allows you to reduce harm. Being gentle with ourselves and others. Sometimes we'll look for validation from other people that they knew that we didn't mean it. I did a session before here where I talked a lot about microaggressions. We won't be getting into that today. However, I studied microaggressions for 10 years. And one time when there was a microaggression that I stated, I just want to stand on the table like, oh my goodness, I know for a fact that was problematic, and I studied this and blah, blah. It didn't matter. I had to be accountable to the impact that I had on that individual and do everything in my possible and everything that was possible to ensure that I didn't repeat that type of harm. So you got to be gentle with yourself and give yourself grace so that you can be accountable and be accountable for the impact of your words and actions. And then we cannot challenge what we cannot acknowledge. Let's just name it, acknowledge it so we can begin to address it. And so I'm really glad to see the things that y'all are liking. It sounds like it looks like accountability is kind, revoke expert positioning, challenging what we cannot acknowledge, honoring experiences, the whole list. I love that. Grace, great. I love it. I love it. Embracing discomfort, revisiting welcome. Yeah. I support us continuing to lean into this list. And as you think of the ones that stand out to you, just think about how you might incorporate that into some conversations you have around equity moving forward. But what is equity? What is equity? Equity is very commonly juxtaposed against equality. And most people think about equity in the context of equality. So equality is everyone having access to everything the same way. We all get the same resources. We all have the same opportunities. Everything is the same. And equality is definitely something to strive to. But equality is so far removed until we begin to address equity. And so what does equity mean to folks in space? Oh, yes. Can someone confirm that you can see the slides?
I can see them.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry if someone's having issues.
Yes. So to the person who sent that message, I think somebody will reach out to you. We'll try to see if we can support that. So what does equity mean to you? When you hear equity, what does that mean to you? Give folks a moment to think and to type. You know, I was going to be asking you questions. Leveling the playing field. Everyone gets what they need to succeed. Not everyone needs the same thing. Mm-hmm. Yes, similar sentiment there. Having what you need to succeed, resources and support, happy, healthy, and successful, that everyone gets a place at the table, leveling the playing field, fairness. What they need. Right, so there's this theme that we're seeing about giving people what they need, making it being thoughtful and intentional about what specific people need in specific contexts to be able to participate and to be included in this particular space. Positive freedom, I like that. Non-favoritism, investment in equality. Okay, yeah. Individualizing resources. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, this is recorded. Yeah, right? Equity is taking critical inventory of the gaps and addressing them. Equity is not a single task. Equity is complete and total person, organization, culture shift. Equity says that people have been experiencing disparate treatment. There have been policies and systems and experiences that people have that literally have made the way that they interact and engage with our society critically different. And as we move around our normal parts of our day, we might be missing those gaps. And equity is about what are the gaps? What are the ways that people have been discriminated against? What are the different policies that have limited people to this point and beyond? What are the different things that have happened contemporarily and historically that still influence people today? What are the different ways that people are being siloed? What are the different ways that people are being marginalized? What are the different ways that people are expending energy differently each and every day to avoid violence? That can be emotional violence, that can be physical violence. What are the different ways that people are having to code switch or assimilate, meaning align themselves with the dominant cultural norm in order to have the same opportunities for advancement, relinquishing a part of themselves to be able to have the similar opportunities for advancement? Equity are those gaps. Equity is about saying, how do we begin to address that, name that, so that we can begin to shift and make a difference in the culture so people can stop being harmed. And in most spaces, when I'm working with different organizations and in the work that we do at C4, a lot of times people will talk about, well, we want to diversify. We want to diversify our student population. We want to diversify our client base. We want to diversify our employee. Goal is to diversify. And I know exactly why, because diversity is so important. Diversity, there's no shortage of research that demonstrates that when diverse folk and diverse lived experiences are in a room, things change, transformation happens, ideas and innovation begins to occur in ways that we haven't seen before. So we know why diversity is important. We know that diversity allows for other people to feel supported in a particular space. And then the goal is to make sure that those diverse folk feel included, that they can have a seat at the table, that they can be able to participate. And then we will move towards equity. I want to propose something a little different. What would it look like if we started with equity first, right? What might we be missing when we start with our initiatives to diversify without considering equity first? I want y'all to tell me what you think. What do you think happens or could happen or has happened to you when we start with our, intensity of diversification efforts without considering equity, given the definitions we just talked about? More intentionality and less tokenism. Yeah. Creating avenues for individuals to support their independence and autonomy. Yeah, I like the definition of equity, Shannon. More inclusion. What happens? Yeah, if we start, I think what someone said, if we're starting with diversity, we might be leading to more division among people. When we start with diversity and inclusion, we're setting people up to walk into spaces that they aren't safe in. Starting with equity first, make sure that their safety is first, that their safety is paramount. I love that. Shared power, shift in how we see each other. Yeah, we might not have applicants that are diverse because of inequity. We're not even seeing them. Opportunity, can they be separated? I like that question. Can fill the gaps only when they're identified. It ignores that diverse people are already there. Yes, diverse folks are already in the space. And because of the inequities, we might not even know or be able to acknowledge it, right? By starting with equity first, we present the critical opportunity to create safe and inclusive spaces, to address the gaps so that people know and don't have to do the work of doing their job and also shifting and changing the organization, so that people don't have to be harmed in the process as we figure it out. Let us think about the difficult questions first, the critical gaps, address those so that the diverse folk who add such critical value to our space, to our work, to our innovation, to our processes, to our teaching, to whatever work we're doing, can genuinely be included and are able to do so without the risk of harm. Yeah. Yeah, so there's a question that comes in about using an inclusive approach is the most effective way to approach equity versus an expansive approach, which gives everyone an equal voice in a space versus one having to be made for them by those who hold the majority. If a space has to be made, then that place is inequitable. Because equity, we're looking at the gaps that says, why are some people's ability to share and to contribute limited in the first place, right? Thank you for that. Yeah. When we start with diversity, we speak past color issues to gender issues, the crises have suffered in the dark since dark bodies lost value after the Civil War. Yeah. Talking about the systemic nature and I believe also intersectionality around racism, right? Absolutely. What issues do we permit ourselves to engage with, not engage with only slightly, right? Because there's some parts of that that are being addressed only in like a sliver of it and not the whole vastness of it. Yeah. I really appreciate the comment that someone brings in the space around inclusion of neurodivergence as well. So important. And so, what are some ways that we can begin to engage in critical conversations around equity? This is, with a bit of assumption that many of us have been having critical conversations around equity and inclusion, diversity. We have a baseline understanding of what dominant ideologies are. We have some understanding of power and privilege and those dynamics. And now we're in this space where we want to begin to engage in it. We want to begin to take action. One of the things that's important to consider when preparing ourselves to take action is to observe our zones of engagement. So I know some folks indicated in the beginning that they worked in schools. Well, this is probably quite familiar because it's adapted from our zones of learning. And when engaging with zones of learning, there's the comfort, the stretch, and the panic zone. This is adapted to think about it as it relates to addressing equity issues. So first you have your comfort zone. This is familiar, easy. It's not necessarily motivating to change. You're just here hanging out with me, right? Then you have your stretch zone. You're like, oh, okay, I'm leaning in. Marked excitement, learning, growing, nervous excitement. I think most people would say that this is the ideal. This is where we want to be. And then you have your panic zone. And this is where folks begin to start feeling overwhelmed, uncomfortable, avoiding. And this role plays a critical place in equity work. This is when I start to see people do this. Or I'm going to go grab my water right now. We're having this uncomfortable conversation. I have the ability and the privilege to be able to leave the conversation and not deal with it. This is also to honor, this is a space where I see people begin to say this feels too much. I have to constantly speak for my group. I'm the only person speaking out. I'm feeling overwhelmed and uncomfortable. I want to avoid this. And so within a particular engagement or issue that happens, something inequitable, we can go in and out of these zones. They're not necessarily in one the whole time. But when we get into that panic zone, we do tend to try and often retreat from it. But what I'm proposing is that as we begin to think about and conceptualize the process, what would it look like to lean into that panic zone? What would it look like to take a note and say, this is activating something for me, and I need to come back to it? What would it look like to question and ask ourselves, am I, utilizing some aspect of my privilege to disengage with this conversation? Right. And so I like to make things quite tangible. And one thing that I know that is particularly close to folks in these conversations is maybe even a conversation like police brutality. And I use that example because in a space this big, it's inevitable that some of us are maybe ourselves, officers, or loved ones, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, brothers, aunties, are doing incredible work as officers who are trying to do community-based policing, we see them going out and doing their best job. We worry about them when they're going in and out of their role. And for some folks, and myself included, when we engage in the conversation, we start to go into our panic zone too, because it impacts us personally. We have been targeted. Our family, our loved ones have experienced violence as it relates to law enforcement. And so it is a conversation that tends to put people in their panic zone. And in those situations, we are absolutely honoring or thinking about the people who are closest to us. We're leaning into that narrative. We're bringing honor to that. Maybe we're, removing ourselves because we're thinking about that. But the conversation, particularly in a space like this, or maybe in another space, might be about the history of policing, right? Looking at the critical history of how modern day police departments have formed, looking at state patrol and night watchers and the transitions of what that has looked like historically. It might be about looking at policy change and shifts and what needs to happen in order to create more inclusive bias training, something that's going to help us address the issue, but we're in the panic zone. And so we completely disengage and say, I'm not part of the conversation. We're missing that critical context of the history that continues to repeat itself instead of addressing the systemic and structural issue. So acknowledging the panic zone is there is so important. And it's okay to be in the panic zone. And it's a place for us to say, am I safe? Do I feel okay? Can I challenge myself here to lean in more? Or am I feeling harmed? And this might be something I need to address. But making sure that that's a space where we're not deflecting, but maybe as examining what needs to happen as a next step. Do I need to make sure that I'm hearing this? Or do I need to make sure that I'm addressing this, right? Yeah, and you can move in and out of all the zones, absolutely. And so the best tool that we have, this is what I say in every class I teach and every webinar and all, the best tool that we have for equity and action is to know ourselves when it comes to confronting inequities. To know ourselves. Yes, we need resources. Yes, we need skills. Yes, we need transformation change. Yes, we need people to be on board. And I'm going to go through all those other ingredients and things that we need as well. But the best tool that we have for equity and action is to know ourselves when confronted with inequity, because that is what's going to determine the next step, whether something happens or whether something doesn't happen. Whether the coalition's built or the coalition's not built, whether someone's harmed or whether someone's confronted and cared for, it all begins with knowing ourselves when inequities arise. So I want you to take a little moment and I want you to think about what happens for you or what might you experience in a moment when something inequitable happens. I want you to think about it for just a moment. What does it look like and how does it show up for you when something, and AKA how do you know when something's off in the space, right? Does your facial expression change? Do you start diverting eye contact? I know they did not just say this. Pit of your stomach, angry, your eyebrows. Mm-hmm. Yes, Bryce, thank you for that. It's not unsafe, it's uncomfortable, but it's not unsafe. Yeah. Yeah, your eyes start to roll. You use humor, right? I see this one a lot. Like, well, at least we're all here, and like you say something to try to lighten the mood. You physically distance yourself. You move in closer. Maybe your tone changes. Okay, your tone changes. Your tone changes. Maybe start to be afraid. Oh no, they're gonna see me as this if I say something. Y'all, we're really making such a big deal of this. You start to minimize. Listen, we're making a big deal of this, right? Intellectualize. Actually, Carter 17 in this scholarly journal says, so we should move past this. Disbelief. I cannot believe this person said it. Guilt, silence, politeness, disgust. I want to be so dissociated with that person over there instead of embracing that maybe at some point that person was you and you actually have all the resources to be able to help that person move forward in the process. But you want everybody else in the room to know that you don't think the way that they think, right? Feeling hot, facial expression, stomach. I feel it in the tips of my fingers. And then I go, I don't know, like it's unique for each of us, right? Yeah. So it's a nervous laughing, worrying about what other people are thinking, fidgeting. Did I hear that right? Yeah. Yeah. Low and direct tone. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No worries. We have a recording for you. Your heart starts beating faster. You start doing things. Now, when I do this, people typically will say, how do I stop doing I love that. Someone says stammering. You can't get the word physically. It's hard to get the words out. I appreciate that. Right. These are anxious symptoms that might come up when engaging in equity-centered conversations. And so this is really important to lean into. And people often think when I bring this up, I'm going to say, let's talk about how not to do this. Absolutely not. That is your cue. When you start to stammer, when you feel yourself checking out, when you start to pick up that pen and play with it, when you feel your face tense up, when you start making jokes, when your heart starts beating, right? When you start to worry, when you get quiet, when you start to rationalize, when you get hot, I want you to experience that as your unique cue that something has happened. And what typically happens when we experience our cue, panic tone. We try to get out of the situation. Maybe we react. Maybe we don't react. Maybe we call someone after and like, you will not believe what just happened in the clinic today. You will not believe what happened. But what if that was our cue to action? And when I talk about cue to action, I love to honor the fact that that looks different for different people. For someone, that might be the person that says, you know what, something's going on in this space, something just happened, I want to draw attention to it and name it. That's equity in action. Some people might need to take some time to process and choose their words carefully and come back to it and say, hey, I just wanted to let you know that when this came up the other day, this is the impact that it had. Maybe you're the person who pulls someone to the side. Maybe you're the person who makes sure that things are documented. What is your action strategy that feels most aligned in your body that you can do? Because I think that when people think that they're not the person who stands up, like me, I'm the person who's going to stand up and say something. People feel like if they're not that person, then they have nothing to, that's absolutely not true. It's about being attuned and aware of your body when it comes to addressing inequities, to be able to take action, whatever that looks like and is best fit. Because if we don't do that, then the other thing that happens is that we don't do anything. We're able to just continue to move on without that level of accountability. So do the initial work. When you're not in a situation, say, what would I feel comfortable doing? And how do I begin to practice that so that when my cue clicks in, I can utilize that as leverage to say, you know, I'm feeling hot, which lets me know that we probably should. Yeah. How do you utilize your cue? Now, I had an exercise that I was going to take us through, so you can see me pop through the next 2 slides really quickly. That's because we don't have time. But I was going to have us watch a video so that you can observe some of the different responses that people have. But just think about it. Think about it next time you're in this space, because inevitably we will be in a place where we will need to address it. So we're not gonna watch that video. If some folks have seen it before, you kind of know what it's about. But basically, it's a situation where a harmful comment is said and everyone reacts. And you see all of these same things come up in people in the room, but people react and respond very differently. So what are the ways that you're going to react and respond? Yeah. What about people who are engaging and maybe perpetuating more harm, if I'm understanding that correctly? Or people who are trying to entice or engage? Being able to respond to that too is an important part of being able to name that, right? Because that's an inevitable part of the process. Some people are going to want to antagonize it. So what can your cue action do for you? Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes by giving people a ton of space, we're activating and encouraging behavior. And then sometimes it's about finding the best strategy to address people. I know for a fact that there's some ways that I address things that are not going to land. And if my goal is to promote equity, I'm choosing to do that, then I need to find the best strategy to resolve it. And that requires me understanding what are the different dynamics that are playing out. So I think that that's a big part of it. Yes. So there's a question. Someone said, can the video be made available? Yes, it will be made available. Yeah. And someone in reference to the last slide asked about anger. Anger is absolutely on there, right? Anger is absolutely on there. And it's one of the ways that that shows up for people. And that's an important way to honor, because anger is valid, particularly when an inequity occurs. So let's talk about moving forward with strategic urgency. And let's look at some of the common pitfalls that happen when people engage with equity. And this is a really great resource. I've linked the authors below, so please feel free to go read the article more thoroughly. But I just took a screen grab of what their chart, and I'm going to talk through it the way that I've seen it in practice. But I think it's helpful to see it visually for some people. The first thing that I see is that people try to do equity. They want to have their 5-step plan, right? To the point of a question we got earlier, like, when there's small or no data available, people say, well, that's not really something that we can address. And so we're going to focus on what's tangible and what we have data to focus on. And so we're going to do what we have the ability to do with the data that we have the ability to have. And so we'll look at that issue later and, delegate and prioritize different things. It's a series of tools or strategies. We have this survey data, so we're going to use this, and that's how we're going to achieve equity. Equity is about whole person, whole system change. That's looking at culture, that's looking at identity, that's looking at healing, it's looking at naming and calling in the different ways that inequities are being perpetuated. It's about naming and calling in the fact that we don't have data on specific populations. And why is that? It's not that people aren't able to talk through what they're experiencing. It's that no one's listening. And why is that? That's the kind of culture shift that happens with equity shift. And that's not just something that we can utilize one specific tool and accomplish. It's about being willing to lean into what all needs to change for people to be heard, seen, or engaged. Siloing equity. It's a team. It's the equity group that's going to make this happen, as opposed to everyone taking mutual responsibility and accountability. A lot of times when it comes to addressing people who have experienced systemic and structural marginalization, we put the responsibility and the onus on those individuals to heal and to recover and to cope with it, with forms of oppression. Let's lean into shifting that thought to say, how do we hold accountability to the perpetuation of it to reduce that, so that people can have a break from all that coping with the inequities that are happening. You have one particular person who's extremely charismatic and is the person who, everyone goes to or sees. What happens when that person leaves? We want to make sure that it's stabilized and that it's a part of the equity process. You have just throw a whole bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks. And really, we want to talk about what does it look like to build capacity for the sustainability of it, and not just hope that what we tried works. We focus on it just structurally and not the individuals. We focus on the individuals and not the structures. We tokenize. We engage with equity in a way that makes us feel like we did something. Ego-driven equity work. And I say that because I want us to make that really intentionally clear. That's not about people who are being egotistical and like, look at me, I'm the person who's doing this work. But I'm talking about the everyday ones of us who feel like if we say or do something, it makes us feel good and it, engages with our personal ego. And then we can be like, I did it and now I can stop, as opposed to continuously seeing how we're part of changing the culture, not in one or two siloed incidents, but rather how do we begin to do the critical work for ourselves to reduce harm on a continual and ongoing basis, changing this culture in ways that's going to benefit us as well. And so I bring into the space Cotter's 8 stages of transformation. And I'm going to, folks might be familiar with Cotter's 8 stages of transformation. If you are, that great. If you're not, that's okay. I'm going to go through it quickly, but you'll be able to get a general sense of it. But I'm going to talk about it a little bit differently because I'm going to interweave equity into the conversation as well. So the first sin in encounters is to create a sense of urgency. And to create a sense of urgency. Now, this is how Ashley refers to it. I'm talking about a very strategic type of urgency, not what I refer to as sloppy urgency, which is where we just try a whole bunch of things or we continue to survey people over and over and over and over and over again without any action. Urgency is about acknowledging that people's health, wellness, and livelihood is at stake. And so we do want to create a sense of urgency. We want to craft and use significant opportunities to inspire people to make a change. We also want to build guiding coalitions. We want to assemble groups of people with the power. And I remind folk that power engages in a lot of different ways. Power is also deeply rooted in the people who are the primary stakeholders, the people who have the most at stake, the people who are being impacted by the issue the most. And giving a group the energy to lead and to support in a collaborative and a collective action, not for that work to be siloed to this guiding coalition, but so that this guiding coalition can help to engage the work to be continual. You need to form strategic vision and initiative. And so something that I really want to note about this is that when we're talking about vision, it's really important to not be to be clear about what's meant by vision and, avoid any ableist ideas around what vision is. To talk about what it's really trying to refer to is, what is the direction? What is the root of it? What is the character of it, right? To help steer the change effort and develop strategic initiatives to achieve that authentic goal that will probably continue to adapt. Unless others raise a large force of people who are ready, willing, and eager to drive the change. And I remind you that if you are in an organization of 10, 4, 5, 6 is a large force of people, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean we have to have 1 million people involved, but it is about engaging and getting folks invested. Removing barriers, remove obstacles to change by changing systems and structures that pose a threat to that vision. And what I often hear whenever I talk about this slide is, what if the barrier or the obstacle is, say, thoughts around leadership? I want to remind folks about the multi-tiered influence of systemic and structural change. There's going to need to be things that happen in leadership, board, executive, director levels. And then there's also the influence that is observed by the continual practice of equity at every level. What happens is when equity is actually put into action and people do it, the outcomes begin to change. The investment begins to change. The influence begins to change. And thereby, there's a higher probability that the equity will be supported because people are seeing the benefit of it through and through. Generate short-term wins. This isn't to say we just, we change the language on our form to say pronouns instead of preferred pronouns. It's not inherently that. It's about celebrating the movement toward consistent and continual change. What's really happening behind that is that people now are not having to continually process what's meant by someone suggesting that something is a preference as opposed to how they identify. And what does that mean for the longer goal of having more equitable space around gender and identity inclusivity, right? And so we want to consistently produce, track, and evaluate and celebrate volumes of small and large accomplishments to keep people motivated and engaged. I think sometimes motivation is something we describe as something we catch, as opposed to something that's built off of habit and consistent behavior. Sustain acceleration and movement. Use increased credibility to change systems, structures, and policies that maybe don't necessarily align with the vision, right? Finding people within the organization that maybe felt that the only way that they could advocate looked like that one particular way, but reinvigorating their passion for equity or for the objective. Yeah. Someone puts in the chat, kind of a lot of people that celebrating little wins isn't enough. Absolutely. And as we celebrate that, we should. Those little things do matter because they matter to the people who are experiencing the systemic marginalization enough. As long as it's not like we did that when we're done, it has to be consistent. It has to be continual. It has to be building to let people know and let people feel confident that the change is happening. I often will encounter people, and it ties into this maintain instituted change, who will say, well, we did a really good job. We had this program and, people still are having issues. Well, what's been consistent in people's lives? People who experience marginalization, what's been consistent is the lack of accountability. And so in order to make an institute change that's going to be felt by people who are most marginalized by the system or by the structure is such a determined consistency to allow people to be able to have that trust, that validation, to have that realization that you are considering all the forms of oppression that has been playing a critical role. So you want to be able to articulate the connections between new behaviors and organizational successes and what that means for development and the work continuing even when you are no longer in the space or that person. And so I'll leave off on this slide before leaving us about a few minutes for questions. I know that there's some questions. Well, actually, I think I covered all the questions in chat, but I got some questions that folks may have. See you, Danica. I want to address the necessary ingredients for change. And this is a resource that my colleague, Olivia Davis, usually presents on this so beautifully. And in describing what are the different and necessary ingredients for change. So let's say that we're moving towards change and folks are ready to engage with equity and they have the skills, they know how to do it. They have the incentives. There's maybe, folks feel motivated to do it. The resources are there, right? Maybe that's funds, maybe that's people, maybe that's time. And there's an action plan. We know what we're going to do, but there's no vision for it. People know what the next steps are, but where are we going is confusing. I have everything I need. I want to do it. I feel like I can do it, but what are we doing? It's going to lead to confusion. Or maybe you have the vision, you know the direction you're going in, you're incentivized, you're motivated to do it, you have the resources, you have the action plan, but you don't have the skills, you don't know how to do it. That is very anxiety provoking. Like, I know I want to address this issue, I just don't know how to. That can evoke anxiety. There's vision, clear direction. You have the skills, you know what you're doing. You have the resources, you have the action plan, but they put no incentives into it. And so people are going to take their precious time and gradual, we'll get there, slow incremental change. I see this every single day. And incentives could be like physical, tangible incentives, but incentives can also be some folks' complacency with the way that things are currently going. And that needs to be leaned into, acknowledged, and addressed. Because when people's lives and safeties and livelihoods and health and wellness and feeling of emotional safety is at risk, that is something that needs to be incentivizing us to move. Then you have the vision, know where we're going, skills, got them, know how to do it, incentivized, action plans, but there are no resources allocated. That is so frustrating. Have you ever tried something there was no budget, no time to do it, no resources put into it? It's frustrating. It makes people want to give up on it. And you have vision, skills, incentives, and resources, but you don't have an action plan. So you just keep trying different things and running down that resource really quickly and de-incentivizing people because you're just starting and it's not the right thing. Starting and it's not the right thing. You're starting and it's not the right thing. And so just like, I'm not much of a chef, but, for those of you who are much better than me at preparing things, that you can sometimes make something happen without all the necessary ingredients. And we're not saying that these are the only ingredients that are required, but it's about being able to do the assessment of what is missing. Do we not have the skill to do this? Right? But when we have the vision, we know what we're doing. We have the skills. We're incentivized. We feel the passion around it. we're given the resources and there's a plan in place, change can occur. What ingredients are missing from the different initiatives, the equity that you are trying to put into action that's missing? Because by knowing what it is means that you can go and ask for it, go get it, go advocate for it, go suggest what needs to take space for the change to occur. And this really speaks to equity not being a single thing that we do, but being able to see all that happens within a culture when it shifts. Because let's use these examples, if these ingredients are changed, that means that there are different parts of the organization that have also changed. That means that the culture of the organization is beginning to change, the culture of the school, the culture of the clinic, the culture of the space is changing because all of these things are working simultaneously together to create that culture change. And so if I'm so glad and grateful to Christina just put it into the chat. Some of this is also going to be helpful in context when we talk about what are dominant cultural norms and institutional biases within organizations, topics that I have had the opportunity to cover before in similar webinars. So the links to those have been provided. Thank you so much for bringing that into the space, because it all goes together and flows together nicely. And there are a whole host of other amazing resources that are also available. And so I encourage people to continue on the journey, as we discussed in the beginning, of engaging with this conversation, asking the questions and doing, all that we can do to create the change that would be equity, filling in those critical gaps and making sure that people's wellness is at a top priority. What questions do folks have? I would love to answer some questions. I don't see any in the Q&A.
So there's one in the Q&A. Sorry, Dr. Stewart. Do you see that one, JP Ramirez?
Yes, I actually answered that question.
I'm sorry. You did. Okay. I thought you did. Sorry, it didn't move away from me. So I wanted to make sure you got that. Thank you. Well, then, yeah. Do folks have other questions? We do have a few more minutes, but thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. I'm so glad I finally got to see you in a live event. It's fantastic. The content is amazing. You could tell everyone is, we want to just stay all week and talk about this. I mean, you're so energetic, you're real, you're saying it how it is, you're humble, you're encouraging. I mean, it's just all these things that, when we talked at the beginning, this is hard. This is work. It's necessary. And it doesn't happen with a flip of a switch, right? And then we're all trying to be on our journey. So I just really appreciate how you shared so much of this information. It seemed the visuals were fantastic. People were, saying that all over the place. So that was amazing.
My pleasure. And thank you to such an amazing group of folks for being engaged. Thank you to you all for allowing me to be here in the space. There's someone in the chat who mentioned something earlier and they left, but they're back. I wanted to just thank Patrick for bringing in neuro diversity into the conversation earlier. I think you left when I acknowledged that earlier, but I did want to name that. Oh yeah, how about that? I'll be here next week. So I'll be here next week to talk about truth, trauma, and equity. And that one we're really going to need to lean into discomfort on as well. I'm going to, with the couple minutes that we have, if it's okay, Christina, I wanted to there were some questions that people had in advance. I just want to kind of touch on a couple of those. And before we do that, I just want to ask folks if you could please fill out this feedback survey. It is so important, so critical. While you fill that or get that link on your phone, I'm just going to answer just a couple questions that folks.
Sorry, Dr. Stewart. So apologize.
Go ahead.
Did want to mention, and we'll put this into the chat as well. If you have not registered for the next session, we probably have it in the chat, but just wanted to tell folks it's same time, same place, 1 week from today. All right, take it away. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you. So someone had a question or a comment in advance of the webinar that was about racial trauma. I'm going to dive deeply into racial trauma in the Truth and Trauma one. So hopefully you can come or have a link to that, because I'm definitely going to go into that one. And so someone asked the question that I think is essential, particularly as I think about equity. How long does it take for someone to come out from burnout? And I want to highlight this question because in doing equity work, self-care is the most selfless thing that we can do. It truly is. It allows us to continue to show up and do this work again and again and again. And so to be able to tune in and say, you know what, coming out of burnout, or this person actually said, how long does it take for someone to survive and come out? When we are experiencing burnout, there needs to be boundaries or things that begin to shift and change for us so that we can be sustained in the work. And I tell people, people say, oh, Dr. Stewart, have you seen this documentary or this movie? It's on the topics that you teach about all the time. You'd probably really love it. I let folks know, I say, that's my burnout boundary. Like, I don't watch or engage with some of this material in other parts of my life because I want to be able to continue to show up and do this work in different contexts, right? So what does it look like to nurture and pour into yourself so that you can continue to show up and do this work? That is the most selfless thing you can do, because it ensures that the work then can continue. But if we stay in the space and continue to burn out, then we won't be encouraged or motivated or even have the capacity to do the work, and then it doesn't get done. Someone asked about equality and equity. We definitely got a chance to talk about that. And if I could just highlight one more. I got a lot of questions about how to apply this in different settings. And so I think that one of the things that's important to consider when applying this in different settings is going back to those tools and resources and the steps. They're going to be applicable in different settings. But the most common variable that will continue to be in each of those settings is you. And that's why I lead with the best tool that you have for moving to actionable equity is to know yourself. Know what things you're willing and comfortable to address, what things you would be willing or comfortable to address, you're just not there yet and you need to work out on and practice that, and what things are continuous to be barriers to you engaging. What does it look like for you? What is your strategy? And can you continue to hone that strategy so that you can be prepared and willing to step up when inequities happen? Someone asks, how much time or energy should be spent on recruiting influential but hesitant, fragile leaders in an organization to engage in authentic equity work? Yeah, so I love the concept of time and energy, because a big part of that is, I think that a lot of times when it comes to equity, we don't lean into as much of strategy, right? So when we're talking about leaders or people who have different levels of, I wish we can go into stakeholder analyses right now, right? Who have different things and different stake in the process. What is going to be the best strategy to engage someone so that the change can occur? Because that's the priority, is the change can occur. And sometimes things need to be just said and stated blankly and blanketly. And I appreciate that. And I think that that's a useful strategy. There's sometimes when that time and energy is being utilized in one way that's not going to be received, particularly if that person has a significant amount of work to do for themselves. It might even be counter to the initiative to continue to try to pursue in a particular way. And so one is upheld strategy and figuring out ways to pivot and address it on a structural level. And then the other part of it is that there's going to be people who are not going to get on board, and the work still has to occur. And typically one of the things that I find that motivates people to get on board more than anything else is seeing it happen and seeing the benefit of it. And so when it comes to engaging authentically in the workspace, the best model for that are the people who are doing it, the people who see people and not able to be authentic and challenge those notions around institutional bias. Like, that's where the culture change starts to happen. But in terms of time or energy, if someone's really hesitant or fragile in terms of seeing change, If it's not an additional strategy that could be utilized to try to engage that person from what is central to them in the process, I would say that, there are some people who will not change in the process, and that's unfortunate for them, but we're going to still do the work. Not so easy to prevent others from designating one person as an equity person. Pushing back against this perception can be frustrating. Your presentation helps. Thank you so much for that comment. And yes, you're absolutely right. And if you are that person, right, making sure that you're letting folks know I'm serving in the role of this person, so they can see how they're utilizing and misutilizing individuals under reliance. Because if you're going, then the work is going, and that's going to be something to address. Christina, thank you. I'm going to talk all day if you don't stop me.
Well, no, that's the problem. Is I think we all would enjoy that, but Dr. Stewart, this has been astounding for me. I am so committed personally and professionally to be in these spaces, and just to finally hear you live, and the energy just coming through the screen, honestly, and the dedication and all of that is just fantastic. And I appreciate everybody who's taking the time today, all your questions, all your comments. This has been wonderful. We hope we will see you next time. If not, we will have it recorded. And we're just so ecstatic to see you next time. So thank you, everyone. We will leave this room open for just a moment so folks can, go back through the chat. If you need something, you can always reach out to us on our website. Our email address is on there and everything. But Dr. Stewart, thank you so much for your time and energy today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.